wealthy entrepreneur.
He was very generous and very giving to the community.
And his closest friend.
A good old country boy. He was like a brother.
Are ruthlessly gunned down.
It had all the hallmarks of an execution.
They would have died almost instantaneously.
Police chase down an elusive killer.
A case like this is like a jigsaw puzzle.
We had no hair, no fingerprints, no DNA left behind. Who had a reason to kill these men?
It's a complete whodunit.
Until the case takes a jaw-dropping turn.
Oh my gosh, where's my mother?
She was held at gunpoint, tied into a chair, and held captive there for a few days. They had more firepower than our SWAT team had.
And finds a killer
This just didn't add up.
no one ever suspected.
It was a real shock.
He had, I felt like, two different lives.
And then you quickly realize that it was all a lie.
You think it's over, but it's not over.
A killer may have gotten away with murder.
Conway, Arkansas. A small city with southern charm, just outside of Little Rock.
It's a great place to live. It's a great place to raise your kids. You know, not a lot of crime, and it's made that way because of the people that live there.
But on Sunday, May 19th, 2002, police receive a 911 call that shatters the early evening peace.
There's people shot next door. I don't know what the situation is, but some girls came over into my house like crazy. But someone had been shot. Everybody had been shot in that house.
Police race to an upscale home in the city's affluent West End.
Patrol officers went inside the residence, saw two deceased individuals laying in the foyer. It was clear to them that we've got a double homicide.
Homicide detectives arrive on the scene minutes later.
Once I entered the residence, I saw the two victims. Both of them were laying face down in the floor. Their hands were to their side, palms up, and blood had pooled around both of their heads. Based on the coagulation of the body fluids, it appeared that they had been down for quite some time. The first of the two victims appeared to be an older gentleman, and he had a folded white towel placed on the back of his head, and there appeared to be a gunshot artifact on the back of the towel. The second victim, the younger man, he had a gunshot wound in the back of the head, and there were white fibers on the back of his head, consistent with the same white towel.
Detectives find no sign of a murder weapon, but something else grabs their attention.
We found a ball cap, and inside that ball cap there was an unspent .45 caliber round. We weren't really sure if that was something that had been purposely left there at the crime scene, or if that was done inadvertently.
An extensive search of the house finds no evidence of forced entry.
There were no signs of disturbance, and tons of things of value still inside the home. Both wallets of the victims were found in the next room. That kind of took away from the idea that this was some sort of robbery or home invasion.
My professional opinion was it had all the hallmarks of an execution.
But if this was an execution, why were the victims targeted? And who were they?
A young lady by the name of Brandy that had discovered the bodies told us who she believed the victims to be. We were able to confirm with photo ID that the older of the two, with the homeowner, Carter Elliott, a local businessman. The second victim was a close personal friend of Carter Elliott, Timmy Wayne Robertson of Star City, Arkansas. Brandy indicated that she and Carter were in a relationship, and she knew Timmy Wayne's because Timmy Wayne sometimes stayed with Carter.
Brandy agrees to go to the police station for questioning, while police reach out to the families of the two victims to tell them the terrible news.
I was in my apartment, and my mother came over. She said, "Oh, Ashley, I'm so sorry." And I said, "Who died?" And she said, "It's your father." I just crumbled to the ground and felt like I had been punched in my stomach, and all I could do was cry my eyes out. I didn't know what had happened. I just knew he had shot
From his humble roots in the tiny city of Helena, Arkansas, to owner of a multi-million-dollar chemical company, Carter Elliott was a self-made success story.
My father was an amazing man. He and my mom got married in El Dorado, Arkansas. My mom was 17 or 18, my dad 20. He didn't go to college, but he's just dedicated and a hard worker and very driven. My dad was really social. He was a lot of fun. He was like social butterfly. He was just fun to hang out with.
Behind that larger-than-life personality was a man devoted to giving.
He wanted to help people. If you were around him or spent time with him, you were taken care of.
One of the people Carter helped was a young man who Carter met through a family friend.
Wayne had kind of a rough upbringing, and my dad took care of him the way he took care of everybody that he came across. He was like a brother. He stayed at my dad's house. We celebrated my birthday together. He went to my best friend's wedding. I mean, he was just part of the family.
Now, both Carter and Timmy Wayne are tragically gone. What's left is the mystery of why this happened and who could have done it.
I can't fathom what had happened or transpired to be shot in the back of the head, face down. It's just so unbelievable.
At the house, investigators continue combing the crime scene.
We dusted the house for latent fingerprints. We went through the trash. We're looking for anything in particular that might give us a legitimate lead.
Police also canvass the neighbors, hoping someone can point to a suspect or even when the shootings occurred.
Even though this was a very quiet neighborhood, not a single neighbor heard a gunshot, not a single neighbor heard a disturbance, so it really was quite baffling. We had no firm direction to go in as far as a potential suspect, and nothing that really told us when this potentially could have occurred. Anything was possible. I walked out of that house and I had as many questions as I did before I walked in. There were numerous things that just didn't fit. I needed to find out what was going on.
Coming up, detectives dig deeper.
There's so much that is bizarre.
People suspected some type of romantic relationship.
And discover troubling evidence.
He had a large book that was in the ceiling.
We found adult diapers.
Before the truth blindsides everyone.
All of a sudden, we had a person that nobody really would suspect.
It sent a shockwave through the community.
I was terrified. I was traumatized.
I don't believe that was an accident.
Hours after discovering the murder of successful businessman Carter Elliott and his close friend Timmy Wayne Robertson, detectives are searching for more clues.
The little evidence we had was at the crime lab, but we had no firm direction to go in as far as a potential suspect.
Detectives bring in Brandy, Carter's girlfriend, who discovered the bodies.
When I investigate a homicide, I look at anybody who has a potential to be upset with the person that would be a motivation to end someone's life over.
If you don't mind me asking, how long have y'all been seeing each other?
I would say probably since last fall.
Are you and he pretty close?
Yeah, we hadn't even had a disagreement.
We also want to know whether or not they had a motive, means, and opportunity to potentially commit the crime themselves.
Would Brandy reveal anything to indicate she might be a suspect?
Trying to establish a timeline here when you last talked to Carter.
Saturday night at about, and I'm estimating, 11, 12 o'clock, I talked to him on the phone. I was in Memphis, Tennessee. He was at home, he said, in Conway.
Brandy says the next day, she and a friend headed to Carter's house when they got back from Memphis.
You know, I just opened the door. And his head is right there at my feet. And I immediately look up and I see another person, and I know exactly who it is. I mean, I see Tim Wayne all the time. I recognize that if I couldn't even,
detectives ask if Brandy knew who might want Carter and Timmy Wayne dead.
Do you have any opinions, ideas,
None.
anything? Anybody
No.
you suspect? Is there anybody that you can think of that may have had a grudge or was mad with Tim?
Not that I know of.
As detectives pull Brandy's phone records to confirm her story, they receive the results of the autopsy.
The medical examiner's report gave us an idea of a timeline that these two victims were killed late Saturday evening. In the case of Brandy Watkins, we were able to account for the fact that she was in Memphis, Tennessee, at the same time that the murders were committed.
Investigators now have an idea of when Timmy Wayne and Carter were murdered, but the autopsy report also reveals chilling details about how the two men died.
The medical examiner was able to tell us they were both flat on the floor when they were shot.
The autopsy report has one more valuable revelation. The killer used special bullets called Glazer Blue safety slugs.
This particular type of ammunition was a rarity. It is extremely expensive and is extremely devastating.
It is also the same type of bullet found in a hat at the crime scene.
I considered it a huge leap because when we found the offender, if they had a tie to this particular type of ammunition, that would be a good indicator to us that we were on the right track.
Armed with new information, police reach out to those who knew Carter and Timmy Wayne to see who might want either man dead. They start with Carter's ex-wife, Lark, who divorced him 10 years earlier.
Our investigation revealed that their breakup was fairly tumultuous.
But did Carter's ex-wife have any reason to harm him? Detectives bring Lark Elliott in for an interview.
She told us background information about the issues that they had when they were married and the breakup of their marriage.
They had been married for 18 years. I think my mother and father always had a kind of a roller coaster of a relationship. My dad was passionate and he was vocal, and at sometimes you couldn't gauge what was going to happen next. It was not a very fun time to experience.
Lark tells detectives she eventually divorced Carter in 1992. Now living in Salt Lake City, Lark remarried a doctor named Dick Conti.
Dick was a friend of my mother's family, and Dick had gone to medical school with my uncle, and that's kind of how their relationship started.
Lark denies any involvement in Carter's death, and when detectives ask Lark where she was the night of the murders, she says she was over 1,000 miles away in Utah.
We were able to determine, based off of phone records and work schedules, that she was in Salt Lake City, Utah, when these crimes occurred.
With Lark ruled out as a suspect, detectives shift focus to Timmy Wayne Robertson. Was it possible that the 25-year-old friend of Carter was the intended target?
We interviewed the family of Timmy Wayne Robertson, all of Timmy Wayne's close friends, talked to girlfriends, ex-girlfriends, find out if there was anybody in particular that Timmy Wayne had issue with, any fights, any bad breakups, anything that indicated that he was the intended target, but nothing that involved Timmy Wayne. Just really rose to the level of somebody being mad at him enough to want to hurt him. Everything from an investigative standpoint kept telling us it had to be something to do with Carter Elliott.
Detectives are back to square one. Then they get a crucial tip from someone familiar with Carter's businesses.
We were told about a local businessman that had partnered with Carter in some business ventures. We found out sometimes he would have words with Carter.
Was it possible the two men were killed because someone targeted Carter over a business deal gone bad?
A bad business deal could be a reason to have committed these these murders.
Something was going to happen. Something would break. I'm looking for business issues that led to two people being brutally murdered in West Conway.
Detectives investigating the murders of Timmy Wayne Robertson and Carter Elliott have just received a tip about a possible conflict between Carter and one of his business partners.
Danny Cook was a local businessman that had partnered with Carter. From what we were told, they had had words from time to time regarding the different businesses that they were involved in. We weren't sure at that point in time if this was maybe a business-related dispute or something like that.
Detectives bring the 38-year-old businessman in for an interview and ask about his relationship with Carter Elliott.
In the last 3 or 4 years, we'd actually started some business ventures together. We had quite a few of those together. I always paid all the bills.
We have to look at all of those different businesses that we're involved in, especially when it came to anything that potentially could have led to hard feelings.
Was it possible a disagreement over money between Danny and Carter turned deadly, with Timmy Wayne caught in the crossfire?
I can only imagine what's going through y'all's minds about this. Potentially every human being on the face of this earth is a suspect. Oh, yeah. Wow, right.
Danny dismisses any notion of conflict with Carter.
Well, I'll just tell you this, Carter was my best friend. Like everybody's got a best friend. I'm sure y'all have a best friend.
Danny also tells police that the night of the murder, he was at home in bed, nursing an ailing stomach.
I've been in a lot of pain, and in the evenings I take pretty much enough medicine that knocks me out.
Detectives look into Danny Cook and Carter Elliott's business dealings.
We determined that we would seek a search warrant for financial records as far as transactions to see if there were any that would have been outside the norm.
But as investigators look into Carter and Danny's business, they uncover something much more personal about Danny's wife, Carla.
An employee of his suspected that Carter and Carla were having some type of romantic relationship. We had several different people tell us that it was water cooler talk. He was a single guy. He liked the ladies.
If the rumors are true, Danny's jealousy could be a motive for murder. Detectives question Carla about her relationship with Carter.
Carla indicated that they kind of flirted with each other, but she considered him more of a brother-type figure than anything else.
Danny also dismisses the rumors of an affair.
Danny Cook indicated that he did not suspect his wife at any point in time of having an inappropriate relationship with Carter.
What's more, both Carla and her son can confirm that Danny was at home in bed at the time of the murders.
Both appeared to have been at home during this period of time.
There was never any real evidence except for could have been. Then the law requires that you have something more than mere speculation.
After hitting a dead end with Danny Cook, investigators drilled deep into Carter's life, looking for anyone who could be a possible suspect.
We interviewed business partners, investors, former employees. We interviewed a group of men that gambled with Carter on poker. We went in every conceivable direction, trying to run down every potential motive, and we just kept coming up with nothing.
Detectives still have no solid leads 3 weeks into the investigation. And the failure to identify a suspect is taking its toll on the victims' families.
We were traumatized. Nothing in life is going to prepare you for murder. I don't think that's something you process.
Ashley also worries about her mother, Lark, who has just lost her ex-husband and is now struggling in her second marriage.
I would go back and forth between Utah and Arkansas to be with my mom. She and Dick were going separate ways, and they had broken up.
As the weeks pass, hopes of finding the killer start to fade.
I never like to lose, but it's a complete whodunit. You start wondering in the back of your mind, is this going to be the case that ultimately I'm not able to solve? I felt like the family of Timmy Wayne Robertson and Carter Elliott's family needed to have that closure. They needed to know what happened.
A killer may have gotten away with murder. That is a huge tragedy for these two men and for these two families.
Then, out of nowhere, a startling development rocks the case.
I had received a phone call that my mom had not shown up for work. My mom goes to work no matter what. I contacted the Salt Lake Police Department and I asked the police department to go to her house. Her bed was unmade, her closet was a mess, things were out of order. Oh my gosh, where's my mother?
One month after Carter Elliott and Timmy Wayne Robertson are gunned down, Carter's ex-wife, Lark, has disappeared in the middle of the murder investigation. Is she on the run from investigators? Or could she be another victim?
I did not know if my mother was alive. I didn't know what had happened. I just lost my father. I wanted to know where my mother was.
In a panic, Ashley and her brother reach out to Lark's second husband, Dick Conti, whom she recently divorced. They call him at his cabin home outside of Carson City, Nevada.
Got him on the phone. Dick was crying and just profusely saying, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm sorry."
Ashley wasn't expecting what she heard next.
He had taken my mom as a desperate act in hopes of getting her back. I didn't know what had happened. I just knew he had her. He kidnapped my mom. He allowed us to talk to my mother. My mother was just completely out of it. My mother told me that she was there against her will and he was unstable.
Ashley is afraid of what Dick might do next.
Dick was crying and threatening to kill himself. He was just overwhelmed with emotion. Who knows what Dick was gonna do?
Ashley frantically reaches out to Nevada police.
Ashley was panicked when she called us. She felt that her mother's life was in danger.
Ashley begs police to go to Dick's cabin in the Sierra Mountains, but warns them of Dick's threat of violence.
It's extremely dangerous for our first patrol officers going in. Somebody was on the phone with Dr. Conti trying to calm the situation, keep him calm. He spun this sort of unreal story about how she was a willing participant. This wasn't somebody that had a plan. He was acting more emotionally than he was logically. Eventually, they got him to surrender peacefully.
I was told my mother was safe, and I'm thankful for that.
Lark is rushed to the hospital as a precaution. She tells police how Dick had abducted her.
He had been lying in wait for her, and then she was held at gunpoint, and then he drugged her, putting her in the back of his truck, and drove from Utah back to his cabin. When she woke up, she was tied into a chair and held captive there for a few days. I was sort of surprised that a man that was considered a prominent emergency room physician in our area could do something like this.
Back at the Douglas County Sheriff's Station, Dick Conti says splitting up with Lark pushed him over the edge.
She didn't want to be married anymore. It just literally drove me crazy and devastated me, I guess.
It ultimately took about 5 hours to get the entire story. But he admitted everything that he had done related to the kidnapping and imprisonment of Lark.
I thought that somehow, by having her come back to Carson, I could rekindle something that isn't there anymore.
But Dick casually mentions something else about Lark that gets detectives' immediate attention.
She recently had her ex-husband who was murdered.
What was his name?
Carter Elliott.
Carter Elliott. Do you know any of the circumstances behind that?
Only when she's told me.
Nevada police contact the Arkansas detectives investigating the murder of Carter Elliott and Timmy Wayne Robertson.
I reached out to Conway, who confirmed that this was actually a crime that had been committed there.
When detectives hear what has happened to Lark, their investigation takes on new life.
The ex-wife of our victim here in Conway is kidnapped. That was too much of a coincidence, and cops will pretty much tell you that they don't believe in coincidences.
Did Dick have something to do with Carter and Timmy Wayne's death? If he would kidnap his ex-wife, what else could Dick be capable of? Arkansas detectives rushed to Nevada to interview Lark's ex-husband.
Have you ever met Carter yet? No. I talked to him twice on the phone when I was at Lark's, just to pick up the phone and say hello.
The detectives asked Dick where he was the night of May 18th, when Carter and Timmy Wayne were murdered.
Do you have a calendar or something I can look at? I think I worked the night of May 15th. I got off and drove to my cabin in Duck Creek, Utah. I know I didn't leave there till the 21st.
Did you talk to anybody that you looked at?
I can't think of anyone that I,
Did you recognize or might have recognized you?
Yeah.
He seemed very calm, given the situation that he was currently involved in. He came off as wanting to be helpful.
After Dick is charged with Lark's kidnapping, investigators are eager to search his cabin home for clues.
That they were able to get a search warrant to go into Dick Conti's home. Dick Conti had this image that he was a successful emergency room physician. Open the front door, and then you quickly realize that it was all a lie.
Detectives investigating the double murder of Carter Elliott and Timmy Wayne Robertson are executing a search warrant at the cabin of Dick Conti. The Nevada doctor has just been arrested for kidnapping his ex-wife, Lark Elliott, whose first husband was Carter Elliott.
From the outside, it's very picturesque. Once you got inside the cabin, you realized that he lived kind of like a hermit.
It was very dirty. There was evidence that animals had been in and out of the house.
Then, police find something even more disturbing.
Everywhere in that cabin, you could pretty much reach a firearm.
The volume of weaponry we found, it was pretty extraordinary for one person. He had more firepower than our team had.
That isn't the most troubling discovery detectives make.
He had a large hook that was in the ceiling. We also found that there were hidden video cameras all over the house.
But nothing prepares detectives for what they find next.
Investigators found maps to Conway. He had notes related to Carter Elliott, his address, letters from Dick Conti to Lark that said that he was willing to do anything to get her back, and the books that discussed how to be a silent assassin.
The next discovery is even more damning.
We found blue tip laser safety slugs, the same type of ammunition that was used to kill both of our victims in Conway.
For Dick Conti to have the same type of ammunition really raised our suspicion that Dick Conti committed these homicides.
As police collect evidence from the cabin to take back to Arkansas, investigators begin to try to answer crucial questions. Did the Nevada doctor execute Carter Elliott and Timmy Wayne Robertson in cold blood? And if so, why?
Dick Conti, by all reports, was a very competent emergency room physician. You have to stop and question what was the motive.
Detectives sit down with Lark to learn more about her second husband.
There's so much about him that is bizarre. He had, I feel like, two different lives. He portrayed himself to be this, a doctor upstanding in the community, when in fact his other life he had guns, everywhere, weapons everywhere, in his house. And that's not something that I wanted to be a part of, was his other life.
Lark also says Dick wouldn't leave her alone after she left him.
Conti had gone on a campaign. He begged Lark to come back through phone calls and sending her letters and cards. When the little things didn't work, that he would escalate.
Was it possible Dick Conti's obsession with Lark caused him to target her first husband, Carter Elliott?
Did you ever make any statements to anybody about you might consider reconciling with Carter Elliott?
Not to my knowledge.
Did you and Conti ever discuss Carter?
I was planning an engagement party for Ashley, and Carter, Ashley's father, was going to come to the engagement party. So he and I were talking on the phone about the party, and maybe that sparked some kind of jealousy in him, being that he was so possessive or obsessed with me. Maybe Conti's nature was that if I can't have Lark, nobody can have her.
The motive in this case was clear. Dick Conti was willing to do whatever it took to get Lark back. That meant taking out his competition, Carter Elliott, and Timmy Wayne Robertson got in his way.
Dick Conti had a motive for murder, but did he have the opportunity? He denies being in Arkansas that night.
Conti had told us that he was at another cabin that he owned in Duck Creek, Utah.
We were able to put together the last landline call he made at Duck Creek and then the first one he made again on Sunday.
Was that enough time for Conti to have killed two men over 1,300 miles away?
We seized his truck and we found adult diapers and a number of gas cans, which would have allowed him to drive to Arkansas back without having to stop for fuel or use the restroom.
We had the right gap in time that gave him enough time to drive to Conway and back.
The theory that Dick Conti is the killer is a compelling one, except for one major complication.
There was no physical evidence that put Dick Conti in that house that night. No hair, no fingerprints, no DNA left behind. And we had not been able to match any of the ballistics from the murder scene to any of the guns found in Dick's cabin.
The odds were stacked against us, but given all the circumstantial evidence that we had, we all believed Conti was responsible for killing these two people.
Dick Conti is jailed on kidnapping charges for abducting Lark.
Dick ended up pleading guilty to get a plea bargain. He got maximum time of 15 years for kidnapping my mom.
But prosecutors know that with good behavior, he could be released early. The pressure is on investigators to build a murder case against the doctor before he gets out.
The standard that we have to reach is beyond a reasonable doubt. A case like this is like a jigsaw puzzle. Reasonable doubt slips in pretty quickly.
9 years pass as investigators painstakingly seek out evidence to implicate Conti.
Even though I had been given other assignments, I continued to follow up, even if I had to do it on my own time.
Prosecutors hold off laying charges in hopes of building the strongest case possible. But Conti's release date is approaching.
Could the family handle us going to trial and him being found not guilty? That could happen.
If prosecutors fail, Lark and Ashley fear for what might happen to them if Dick walks free.
Dick murdered my father, he murdered Timmy Wayne, and if he could get to my mom, he's gonna kill her too. I was petrified of Dick. I was convinced that Dick would kill us.
Almost a decade has passed since Carter Elliott and Timmy Wayne Robertson were brutally gunned down.
That long space of time felt like hell to me. You think it's over, but it's not over, because you're just waiting for what's going to happen next.
The prime suspect, Dr. Dick Conti, has spent the last 9 years in a Nevada prison for kidnapping Carter's ex-wife, Lark. But he's about to be released.
My fear was there was a very good chance that if he was released, he could just disappear.
2 days before Dick is set to go free, prosecutors charge him with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The Nevada doctor is extradited to Arkansas to stand trial.
We had evidence, but unfortunately, a lot of it was circumstantial. You always have a little bit of a knot in your stomach as a prosecutor when you've got a case like this, especially one that's high profile.
But before Dick Conti even steps foot courtroom, a surprise witness comes forward.
A cellmate of Dick Conti said that Dick told him that yes, he had killed Carter Elliott, but that we couldn't prove it. And he also said they'll never find the murder weapon. To get information like this is always kind of a double-edged sword. Are they credible? Is a jury going to believe them?
The big thing was making sure that the jury found it credible. And so that meant that they weren't going to get anything in return for their testimony.
At trial, prosecutors present their case to the jury.
Dick Conti was a scorned lover, and that was our theory of the case. You know, he was in love with Lark, and he was willing to do anything he needed to do to keep her. And if that meant that Carter Elliott was a threat, then he had to eliminate the threat. Timmy Wayne Robertson, unfortunately, became a victim as well.
In front of the families of Timmy Wayne Robertson and Carter Elliott, prosecutors reveal how the crime unfolded.
Dick Conti went to the door, dressed in police tactical attire, and yelled, "Police search warrant." Once they opened the door, he burst in, ordered them to the ground, and then had them place their hands behind their back, placed the folded towels on the back of Timmy Wayne's head, and immediately executed him. And then he turned around and did the same thing to Carter Elliott.
Dick Conti had planned it down to every detail so that he would be certain that the only things that were left at the scene was what he intended to leave at the scene. Some sort of a calling card in the form of an unspent bullet. I don't believe that was an accident.
The jury hears from a host of witnesses, including Lark and Ashley, who testify about Dick's relationship with Lark and how he kidnapped her.
The kidnapping spelled out what kind of motive he had and what he was capable of doing.
The defense argued that with the lack of DNA, with the lack of fingerprints, with the lack of a murder weapon, the case was just merely circumstantial. And they also said that there was no reason for Dick Conti to commit these crimes.
On January 22nd, 2013, after only 40 minutes of deliberation, Dick Conti is found guilty of 2 counts of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison.
I felt relief. I felt like justice had been served, and I feel like he received the punishment that he deserved.
There was a relief. That there was some level of accountability and justice for the family and for our community, but also justice is a pretty poor substitute for the loss of a loved one.
For Ashley Elliott, the memory of her father and friend are not in how their lives ended, but in how they were lived.
If people think of my dad, I hope they focus on the positive things that he did in his life. He left a legacy behind, which is my brother, myself, and our children, and he was a wonderful man. And Timmy Wayne, I just will never forget Timmy Wayne's smile, and he was just gentle and kind, and just as country as they come, and I loved that about him, and he was just there anytime I needed him.
Deep in the heart of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, a storm of startling secrets and terrible truths shock a close-knit community and fracture a family. With murder.
I still get emotional recounting this whole saga.
A lot of people were visibly upset and crying about what had happened.
There had been a lot going on behind the scenes for months that no one was really aware of.
The hidden secrets and deadly deceptions hide unthinkable crimes.
Right under our noses and we didn't even know.
Lies untangled, tragically released.
It was shocking.
Nobody knew what had happened.
Who did it?
We don't know who this person is. It's scary.
And why?
There was a lot of twists and turns to this case.
But nobody knows the real, twisted, sick, dark truth.
A secret to die for. In southern United States on the banks of the Mississippi River is the culturally rich city of Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Baton Rouge it's a great city. It's the capital of our state of Louisiana. There's lots of culture. The reason people love it here is the food, the people. It's a great place to live.
This exciting, eclectic locale attracts many people, including Scott Rogers.
Scott Rogers was a very flamboyant and charismatic person. Everybody loved his personality.
He was a charismatic type of person.
Scott was drawn to the rich culture of Baton Rouge for new and bigger opportunities, leaving his UK life behind.
In Bury St. Edmunds, England, Scott Rogers had started a performing arts academy with his former wife. He taught dance, they taught acting lessons, public speaking.
And I think at one point they had almost 800 children enrolled.
Scott loves his new home in the US, and it isn't long before his daughter, Kimmy, and two members of his extended family, Matthew and Stuart, join him in Baton Rouge.
From all appearances, Scott and the family seem to be doing very well. He bought a large house just south of Baton Rouge. And it was a beautiful home. And then after a period of time, Scott decided to adopt a little boy.
The adoption process is pretty straightforward. Fill out the paperwork and give a needy child a loving family.
And they were all living together in Scott Rogers' home. And it was certainly large enough for all of the people that they had living under that roof. And Scott Rogers appeared to be the happiest person on earth.
But Scott and his family are harbouring shocking secrets and lies that are festering just below the surface.
It was right under our noses and we didn't even know the truth.
As Scott and his family embrace their new life in Baton Rouge, it isn't long before Scott begins making a name for himself around town.
Scott Rogers was very liked in the Baton Rouge area and the community. He was very involved in the church. He would help with charity events and anywhere and everywhere he could. People loved him.
To make money and help local charities, Scott starts a video production company and everyone chips in.
It was a family-run business.
Matthew and Stuart, as well as Kimmy, were all involved in his production company.
Scott and his family produce promotional videos for several non-profits and charities in Baton Rouge. But the ambitious business owner has a secret desire.
He wanted to get in front of that camera.
After Scott was in Baton Rouge for a period of time, he started producing a television show.
He did a local TV show called Around Town on Saturday mornings.
The Around Town show continues now with all the good and positive in our community.
Scott had his family helping him. Stuart did pretty much most of the filming. Matthew ran the business.
And his daughter Kimmy works as Scott's assistant and receptionist.
He liked to bring people on to do a cooking segment. He had segments on there where people performed.
And over time, he built up an audience for the show itself, and he became more of a public figure within the community by jumping off of that show.
He was such an upbeat person, and people around Baton Rouge and surrounding, they loved him.
He was funny. In the day and age we live in, it's nice to just lay low and let the stress go and just laugh and smile. It just felt lighthearted that I wanted to keep watching.
Their studio was actually located in an old shopping mall here in the city. The cameras were top-notch, the latest technology, the lighting was professional, the sets were professional. Everything about it was first-rate.
That's when he really started getting a following.
And his show begins to attract more high-profile guests.
Scott was very, very good at bringing guests onto the show who had some sort of level of influence. Law enforcement executives from various agencies, public officials, congressmen, governor, the district attorney, and he would let them come onto his show and plug whatever they wanted to talk about.
Congressman, it's always a pleasure and an honor to have you on our show. Hey, Scott, it is great to be here.
So at this point, Scott has become somewhat of a known entity in the community. He's something of a celebrity. He's on television every week. He's showing up at different events.
Not sure if you caught the Dunham Jazz Ensemble around the corner as you came in. amazing, talented group.
People did look at him as a local celebrity in Baton Rouge.
Scott finds a way to expand his audience even further and help his community.
He got invited to preach a sermon at a non-denominational church here in Baton Rouge. He looked around, saw this congregation that received him very well, and he thought, I can do this.
Scott loves the thrill and respect of preaching and decides to follow his newfound calling.
He got ordained online and then he opened his own church.
Now, Scott Rogers, the man around town and local TV celebrity, is also Pastor Scott.
And first service, I'm told he had 50 to 60 people show up at his church.
He had the gift of gab, naturally, because to start a TV show and obviously start a church, you have to be able to speak to people.
He's also now becoming a religious leader.
It's at this point when Scott would bring in someone that will become an integral part of his professional and personal life.
Maria Edwards was co-pastor of the church with Scott, and she helped bring other people into the church and put together the sermons and the program that the congregation would see each week.
She and Scott had an extremely close relationship. She was in charge of financials for the church. Basically, she was in charge of everything.
Maria Edwards was frequently at Scott's home on weekends. They had big family meals. They got together for holidays together. She was very much part of the family.
But how well does Scott really know his new friend and business confidant?
There are just certain types of people that you're suspicious of.
A lot of people do have secrets. What you see is not always the way somebody really is.
Scott's facing a similar issue. His increased public presence is beginning to raise eyebrows.
I just thought, there's more to this guy. I thought that his persona as he presented it was just completely false. But a lot of people did not share that opinion.
Scott Rogers has built a powerful public life for himself and for his family. But disturbing questions and painful secrets will tear it all apart.
There's a deep, dark secret that's about to come to light.
Scott Rogers has built a good life in Baton Rouge. With his family, he runs a successful TV production company and a local church.
He's something of a celebrity, and he's very involved in the community.
Scott is also a foster parent and eventually decides he wants to expand his family even further.
He decided he wanted to adopt a second little boy. And he went on his TV show saying, I'm adopting a second child, and as soon as the adoption's final, I'll have him on the program so you can all meet him.
Scott fills out the boy's adoption papers, and it's not long before he welcomes him into the family.
He was recognized by the Department of Children and Family Services for fostering children in his home.
To the public, he was a good person. People looked up to him. He was highlighting the good in the community. He was bringing to light the nonprofits, giving to the charities. He's a perfect parent.
He presented himself in a way that was very positive and civic-minded, and over time, he had built up quite a network of people, both personally and professionally, who thought very highly of him.
Many of them are invited to appear on Scott's TV show to discuss important social issues.
Wherever there was a powerful politician or somebody who held a powerful office, he was right there.
He invited elected officials, from the governor to statewide elected officials to the mayors. I mean, anybody in any prominent role in the community that he could get on the show, he brought in. He just fawned all over them.
Which he did shamelessly. He showered people with praise and sat there and told them how wonderful they were and stroked their egos on this show. And then what he did with all of these networks he formed is that he created this aura of legitimacy and respectability.
Scott begins to utilize these new, powerful political connections for his own financial benefits.
He tried to really expand it by getting contracts with politicians to do their political campaigns or whatnot, any video services that they needed.
Scott's plan works. He's approached to co-produce a series of public education videos for Homeland Security on how to prepare for natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina. The contract will be shared between Scott and a local company owned by Rana Gray.
Rana is a fairly well-known person in this community and in political circles. She has a background in public relations and politics and campaign management.
My business partner and I had a small public relations firm in Baton Rouge. The director of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness asked me if we'd be comfortable working with him, and my business partner and I said sure. So we ended up working on this project with Scott Rogers' company.
But afterwards, their relationship becomes soured when Scott reveals a more unscrupulous side.
Our client discovered that he was taking the same content and reselling it to the State Emergency Operations Center. So this content was basically being paid for twice.
Even more brazen and personal, Scott keeps the final $15,000 payment owing to Rana's PR firm that he collected.
He was refusing to hand over our fees. He was keeping them.
He pretty much scooped it all from beneath her by getting all the money, then refusing to give her her part of the money.
It was just very upsetting.
And this is where it gets ugly and public.
It resulted in a lawsuit being filed over non-payment of monies.
He was so mad that he was able to get the local newspaper to write a story where he claimed that he was forced to work with me and just saying lies about us. I mean, to me, it was slander. I was so angry about this because your entire livelihood and profession depends on you maintaining a reputation.
To defend herself and her company's reputation, Rana fights back.
I wrote a letter to the editor to try to correct it and set the record straight.
It was really the only recourse she had.
The newspaper publishes Rana's rebuttal. But her letter calling out and naming Scott Rogers does little to tarnish his squeaky clean image.
He was important, and he had a lot of important friends.
Why would anybody question somebody who was a pastor in a church?
But he had a dark side that no one here knew.
The shiny veneer of Scott Rogers' public persona seemed to be chipping away for some, but for Scott, building pressure and secrets only intensifies his resolve.
I had no idea the lengths he was going to try to destroy our firm. He was calling people at night, urging them to not work with us.
This is not the Scott Rogers from television.
It was just another part of the psychology of Scott Rogers. It was just part of the craziness.
But little does Rana know, her letter will set off a chain of events that will expose startling secrets. One day, when Scott Rogers is away from home, a life-changing disruption to his illustrious life comes crashing down on him in a very personal and devastating way.
Scott Rogers had custody of 2 foster kids, and Child Services removed them from Scott's home.
The kids were taken away from him, and Scott was very distraught, and he felt like his world was crumbling.
What is going on, and what deception, lies, and hidden truths are threatening to be revealed?
You think that this is a great person, but behind those closed doors is a very dark secret.
And it may only just be the beginning. Popular TV host and church leader Scott Rogers is devastated after his 2 foster children are removed from his home.
Child Services said he had improperly filled out his paperwork. That's what led to Child Services taking the kids.
You know, I'm sure there were many questions and many untruths told on his application to even get these kids. And so once all that is revealed, it is Child Services' main priority and obligation to remove those children for their safety.
It's a publicly humiliating and troubling situation for Scott Rogers.
He was very distraught.
Scott Rogers gets Maria Edwards, his lieutenant at the church, to do a conference call with some of the parishioners and tell them it's all a big misunderstanding, that this has to do with him checking the wrong box on a form with the federal government. They were all horrified and very supportive of him at that time.
What Scott and his parishioners don't realise is that Rana Gray is the person responsible for the children being removed from his custody. And it all started with her letter in a Baton Rouge newspaper.
That letter to the editor changed life for everyone involved in this story.
When she wrote this letter to the editor that included Scott Rogers' name in it, and that started this whole chain of events.
a young man living in the UK who had been looking for Scott Rogers for 13 years, found my letter to the editor online.
The mysterious young man sends Rana an email. He says he was a former student of Scott's art school in the UK.
I was so shocked at what the email said.
The real story why Scott Rogers emigrated from the UK to the United States.
I don't think anybody had a clue about his past.
There was deception and lies. He fed people a lot of BS.
Shocked by the troubling truth of Scott Rogers, Rana Gray spends the next 10 months putting together the puzzling pieces of his past.
She took it and ran with it, and for someone who had no investigative background, no law enforcement background, Rana Gray just did a tremendous job.
We had 5 or so federal agencies involved. We had 2 U.S. attorney's offices, Homeland Security, ICE, there were immigration people involved, U.S. Postal Inspection agents.
But little does anyone know that the federal investigation into Scott Rogers will uncover something else startling about him. He didn't just lie on the children's adoption papers.
Apparently, he had lied on some immigration forms he had filled out when he come to the States.
It's a felony offense.
Federal agents felt they had enough to take this before a federal grand jury.
The screws tighten on Scott even further when Kimberly, Stuart and Matthew receive subpoenas to testify in his fraud case.
So this is just building more and more frustration for Scott Rogers. If it comes to light that the applications to get into the United States were fraudulent, well, guess what happens? Reported back to the UK.
He was scared to death. And that's when everything started going downhill for Scott.
He was worried that the government was coming to get him. It was basically driving him crazy. Scott believed that the government was watching him and monitoring him, and he believed that they could tap in and listen to any conversations through cell phones. So he wouldn't allow guests at the house to bring cell phones into the house. He had to turn them off and leave them on a table in the entryway to the house.
Scott also fears that the security cameras inside his home may be compromised.
Scott believed that they could possibly tap in and view his cameras. They were all turned and pointed up to the ceiling where they couldn't catch any footage in the house.
Not knowing who to trust or what other secrets and lies could get exposed, Scott Rogers attempts to escape his troubles.
He was very emotional. He was mixing painkillers with alcohol.
And his downward spiral continues out of the house.
I remember thinking, I wonder where he gets his money. I can't imagine this show generates much income. There's got to be some other revenue stream coming in.
He was considered somewhat of a high roller at the casino in Baton Rouge, and he was seen there almost every night.
And he wasn't winning. He was losing.
So he had debt, and some people who develop a gambling problem, I'm told, keep thinking they're going to hit the big payday and it's going to be worth it.
Scott's family doesn't know what to do.
They're seeing him spiraling out of control. They're just thinking, oh my God, he's going through so much.
I can't imagine how upsetting it was for them.
In the days leading up to the grand jury convening to hear witnesses, Scott had arranged something of a family dinner at the house. Scott was struggling with everything that was going on, and he thought that he was feeling like the end was near.
Fortunately, Scott's friend and co-pastor is there to offer support.
I think he knew that they were about to deport him, or he was going to go to jail.
The stress affects the whole family. But the show must go on, and Stuart is happy to get away to do some work at the studio.
One evening, Stuart was at the studio in Baton Rouge.
Stuart ends up closing up. He goes to take the garbage out.
From what I understand, he walked out toward the dumpster.
Then Stuart is seen getting into a black vehicle.
And nobody had seen or heard from him since then.
Maybe he's been kidnapped.
He has disappeared.
Scott and his family family are in turmoil, deeply troubled by the mysterious disappearance of Stuart, who may have secrets of his own.
Stuart was at the studio in Baton Rouge, and he went to take the trash out, and he got into a car and left from the studio area. His family were concerned about his well-being because they hadn't seen or heard from him in a couple of days.
There's this fear something is wrong.
So what happened to Stuart? Scott has secrets and a growing list of enemies. Is it possible one of them was behind Stuart's disappearance? And who were the two men in the car?
We don't know.
And so there was a lot of confusion, I think, among everyone of what was going on.
Luckily, Scott is able to obtain the surveillance footage of the outside trash area.
So this is actually all caught on video. Stuart goes to take the garbage out and walks to this black vehicle with two people.
It's scary.
They are possibly assuming he's been kidnapped or he's been picked up by officials to be questioned about Scott Rogers.
There was a level of paranoia, especially on Scott's part.
He went into a total panic about it. Stuart's missing. They took the children and now he's disappeared.
I can't imagine how that must have made that congregation feel.
They came together. They had his back.
With Scott in deep crisis, Matthew contacts WAFB-TV, the station that airs around town, and tells them the show is cancelled due to a family catastrophe. And Maria goes to Scott's home to support the family in their time of need.
Maria had been staying with Scott Rogers, doing her part to just whatever she can do to be there for a friend, for her co-pastor.
Maria was very concerned about the well-being of Scott.
He hadn't slept in 2 or 3 days.
Scott is not only despondent about the missing Stuart, the grand jury into his immigration status is looming.
The federal government was going to have him deported for the false information he put on his immigration paperwork.
I can imagine he was scared to death.
He was a man who was used to having control over everything, and now his control was starting to unravel and be lost.
His world was crumbling.
It's early in the morning before the grand jury hearing for Scott Rogers, and Scott and Matthew have been up all night. Around 5 a.m, Maria is awakened by voices downstairs.
Scott and Matt had stayed up all night and weren't sleeping.
They're roaming the house, agitated.
She has no idea what's going on.
She saw Scott and Matthew prepare a number of documents.
Scott Rogers looks at Maria with a soul-searching gaze and passes her some documents and envelopes, then brushes past her to bed.
He believed that he was going to be deported after the grand jury convened.
He started talking to her about how scared he was. I believe Scott even asked her to say prayers over him.
Scott and Matthew are exhausted and distraught as the long night turns to morning. Hours later, what everyone has been dreading has arrived. It's time to leave for the grand jury.
Scott's daughter, Kimmy, had been called before the federal grand jury. Matthew had been called, and Stuart had been called.
But with the family in serious turmoil, Matthew decides he's not going to testify.
Kimmy was leaving to go to the grand jury. He said, I'm not going. He was staying there with Scott at the house.
There's that fear deep inside that everything is about to come to light.
Across town, with Stuart still unaccounted for and Matthew a no-show, Kimberly does her duty and prepares to testify.
Kimmy was at the federal courthouse in Baton Rouge to testify in front of the grand jury into the inquiry into Scott Rogers.
None of the proceedings, to my knowledge, actually got underway.
Back at the house, Maria Edwards nervously stands by the front door, looking out the window, feeling the immigration authorities will storm the property at any moment.
Maria was very distraught and was very concerned about Scott.
The world around Scott Rogers is in deadly crisis. A shocking secrets blast to the surface. Just before 1 p.m. on the first day of Scott Rogers' grand jury hearing, the tranquility of this quiet family neighbourhood is shattered by 2 loud blasts. The Iberville Parish Sheriff's Office receives a distressing 911 phone call from a woman at Scott's residence.
I just had another voice. Oh my God!
She was very distraught and upset.
The caller identifies herself as Maria Edwards.
Ma'am? To go and do something. I just have to know if you can you please send somebody over very quickly, please. A gun? What happened?
She had heard some loud pops that she believed to be gunshots.
She was frantic.
Can you please send somebody over very quickly, please?
And she says, just get here. Just hurry up and get here right now.
Oh my God!
And so they dispatched Iberville Parish Sheriff's Office to the scene.
When we arrived on the scene, we were met by Maria Edwards. Maria was very distraught.
Also on the scene are investigators Laurie Morgan and Ronnie Hebert.
We had to find out what was going on.
We made our way up the stairs. We proceeded to the door and opened the door of the bedroom.
Inside, they make a grisly discovery.
We saw Scott Rogers laying in the bed with a large amount of blood.
He had one single gunshot wound to the forehead.
It looked like he was just shot right where he laid.
Everybody was, like, oh my God, who would do that to Scott Rogers?
And as we got more into the room, we could see some feet on the other side of the bed.
The other victim is soon identified as Matthew, one of the residents of the house.
We observed a gun laying on the floor next to Matthew, as well as what appeared to be a gunshot wound to his head.
But Matthew still has vital signs.
They called EMS immediately, and he was airlifted to a nearby hospital.
If Matthew survived, eventually Matthew may open up and talk about what all happened.
Unfortunately, Matthew never makes it off life support and dies from the gunshot injury, leaving detectives to solve the mystery.
And then as the scene unfolds, as you're in there photographing and finding evidence, the first thing we assumed was that it was murder-suicide.
But nobody knew what had happened. It was too premature to make a call.
It was just a bizarre crime scene. It really was.
Local news outlets hear about Scott and Matthew's deaths and are now at the scene.
That was an instant story. This was a hot topic.
I was a reporter in Baton Rouge at that time. We're all working our sources. We're trying to find out a little more detail.
Word has also reached Scott's parishioners.
There was maybe 10 to 20 people out there on the street in front of the residence during the investigation, visibly upset and crying and shocked about what had happened.
While all of this is unfolding, authorities inform Kimberly of the tragedy.
She was in court in Baton Rouge at the time.
When they got word that there'd been a shooting at the house.
Kimberly is devastated. So the grand jury is adjourned just as new startling facts about her deceased father were about to be made public.
We learned that Scott Rogers had actually changed his name about 5 times over the course of his life.
His real name is actually Richard Scott Rogers.
And when filling out his immigration paperwork, Scott Rogers used variations of his name and did not disclose information about the previous case that he had been charged with while in the UK.
And what he was charged with shocks investigators.
Scott Rogers, as it turned out, was a child molester.
Scott Rogers had been accused of sexually abusing a young boy when he was running the Performing Arts Academy in Bury St. Edmunds. And he wasn't the only one who was sexually abused.
It turns out Ethan was one of them. And now, as an adult, after hunting Scott for years, he shared his story with Rana.
He mentioned in the email that there'd been a court case involving one of the young boys abused by Scott. The tabloids were just going crazy with this story.
But during the trial, it was the boy's word against one of the most respected people in the community.
It's almost no surprise that the trial ended in a hung jury.
He was acquitted of the charges.
But the negative publicity generated by the trial severely damaged Scott's reputation. His wife soon divorced him, enrollment in his arts academy dropped, and so Richard Scott Rogers fled to the US to start a new life under his new name.
So in his head, nobody's gonna find him. He has escaped his deep, dark secrets.
So he came here determined to not get caught again.
Investigators wonder, was Scott's shameful secret somehow related to his and Matthew's deaths?
Nobody knew what had happened. We had to find out what was going on, put that puzzle together, and then we'll make a determination as to what we think happened.
At the crime scene, they find some disturbing evidence. Several blood-stained notes.
It appeared that they were suicide notes written by Matthew.
And others containing instructions for Maria Edwards.
All kind of account and personal information.
There were also very explicit directions on how to sell off businesses and how to handle the finances.
It seemed like everything was being left with Maria in charge.
We found some wills that were written by Scott Rogers.
And they named Maria Edwards as the sole beneficiary.
It was shocking.
It appears she benefited greatly from the deaths of Scott and Matthew.
It was very concerning that she was in the house at the time it happened and that he had changed his wills, leaving everything to her. Scott had his security systems in the house, and it was very suspicious to us that the cameras were turned up to where they could not film any activities in the house.
The police want Maria to answer some serious questions, but she isn't cooperating.
And she didn't want to talk to them without a lawyer.
So why would you need an attorney?
Maria's behavior was very abnormal, so we felt that there might have been a little bit more going on there that she wasn't telling us.
Detectives wonder if Maria Edwards may have information about Scott Rogers and Matthew's mysterious deaths.
We learned that Miss Maria seemed like she was going to benefit from this.
He left all his fortune to her. He left everything to Maria, yet he left nothing for his own daughter, his own biological daughter.
So, to me, she was a suspect.
But at that time, we still had no evidence to link Maria into being involved in what happened upstairs.
She continued to say, I needed my attorney present. And finally, about 9 days after the shooting, she arranges to go in with her lawyer and do her interview.
Chris Alexander, who was apparently the attorney for Miss Maria Edwards. She was very nervous.
Maria did deny any knowledge of knowing that Scott had ever molested any children.
All I saw from him was doing good.
She got fooled by Scott Rogers. She got duped just like everybody else. Could you tell us what transpired that day?
She gave us a little bit of background on how Scott had been distraught about everything going on in his life.
He was desperate, he was crying.
Maria says after Kimmy left for court, Matthew and Scott went upstairs to Scott's bedroom.
I stayed downstairs, and I'm now waiting to hear from Kimmy about the court, what's happening in the jury. At the same time, I'm looking at all the cars because every noise, a truck or a car or something, well, they're gonna come and pick them up, they're gonna take them. And as I was doing that downstairs, I heard a shot, and I was freaked out. And I heard a second detonation.
Did Matthew or Scott tell you that I'm going to shoot myself, or Matthew's going to shoot me, or anything like that? Never discussed?
Never discussed. Never in my wildest dreams.
We truly believe that she was downstairs when it happened.
But they need to be certain.
She going to submit to the DNA?
Yes, and I already told her about that.
Okay.
And I appreciate y'all doing it at the end of the interview.
Your DNA will be compared to the DNA on the weapon.
And the results clear Maria of any suspicion of wrongdoing.
Matthew was the only one that fired the gun. Maria was definitely downstairs at the time of the shooting.
It was a murder-suicide. His own son-in-law shot and killed him before he killed himself.
In the end, he was too cowardly to just take his own life.
Investigators soon learn that's the reason why Stuart disappeared.
Originally, Scott had talked to him about killing him and then killing himself.
Stuart wanted no part of that, and so he wanted to get out. So he arranged an escape, essentially.
He reached out to a federal agent, and then, from what I understand, 2 federal agents arrived the next day. They put him in their unit and took off with him to put him in protection.
Stuart agrees to be interviewed by Iberville Parish investigators, where he will eventually expose even more shocking secrets about Scott Rogers.
I've been through a lot of interviews, but that was probably one of the most interesting and heartbreaking interviews I've ever been a part of.
I met Scott Rogers when I was 12 years old. My parents met Scott with me, and Scott extended me a full scholarship at his performing arts school. By the time I was 13, he was engaging in sexual abuse with me as a kid. There were at least 3 other kids that I know of.
One of them was Matthew.
That, to me, is mind-blowing.
He basically manipulated Matthew and Stuart to live with him.
The truth is, if when I was like 17, you could have come down with an army and I wouldn't have left that man.
He basically brainwashed these kids to come into the United States with him.
And Kimmy had actually married Matthew at Scott's request to help with the citizenship process.
It was a cover marriage to get him into the States legally.
But Scott's dark past would eventually catch up with him. And this time, he's unable to escape it.
He had built such a public persona of respectability, and he knew that was over, and that he was going to be exposed for what he really was, and I guess his ego just couldn't stand to go on like that.
So he chose to take the easy way out.
And unfortunately, Matthew's been brainwashed for 23 years, so he does. He shoots him first, and then he turns the gun on himself and shoots himself in the head.
I don't shed any tears over Scott Rogers' demise, and I don't think a lot of people do.
There's no telling how many victims Scott Rogers would have left in his wake had this not come to light.
And it all started with Ronna Gray's letter.
I get emotional recounting this whole saga. This little letter to the editor changed everything. I don't know that Scott Rogers would have ever been exposed for what he really was.
This makes me realize that a lot of people do have secrets and hide things, and you don't always know their true ways.
I was a police officer for 32 years, and I learned, as every police officer does, that there's evil in the world. What's hard to accept, though, is that they don't look like monsters. They don't wear a name tag or a shirt that says, I'm dangerous, I'm evil, I'm a child molester. The ones that are the most dangerous are the ones that you trust.
Good friend of the show is Colonel Michael Edmondson.
I don't ever want to meet another Scott Rogers. I don't ever want to investigate another crime like this.
And I pray that all of his victims, be it people in the UK or be it here, they have the strength to move forward.
It was a real shock, because, he was a neighbour.
It was a real inner feeling, we've got to solve this for this young kid here.
Obviously an evil man. I would find it hard to forgive him.
In our minds, there was more to tell. This couldn't be the first time that he'd done this.
On Sunday, November the 26th, 2000, the worried mother called the police, telling them that her daughter hadn't come home after Christmas shopping. When initial inquiries proved fruitless, West Yorkshire Police launched Operation Conifer, one of the largest missing persons investigations in their history. Despite all their efforts, it was 9 excruciating months before they found out what had happened to her.
Bramley in West Yorkshire is a suburb of the city of Leeds. Once a picturesque village with a rich industrial past, it was redeveloped into the Bramley of today, but it has retained its strong sense of community.
People do come and look after one another, so to speak, like to see one another and have a chat.
Everybody knows everybody. They are pretty friendly. Personally, I don't know any nasty person that lives in Bramley as a community.
At 7 p.m. on Sunday, the 26th of November 2000, West Yorkshire Police received a phone call from a Sharon Hallhead, reporting her 16-year-old daughter, Leanne Tiernan, missing.
Her mother gave us a description, and that was of a 16-year-old girl, slightly built. She was under 7 stones, with long, brown hair, light brown hair.
Police immediately got to work interviewing family and friends to piece together her movements that day.
She waved goodbye to her family and set off on the short bus ride into Leeds with her best friend, Sarah, to buy some Christmas presents. Leanne bought Sarah some jewellery for Christmas, and she put those in her pocket, and they caught the bus back then from the city centre back to their home at Bramley. Leanne got off the bus with Sarah at Sarah's stop, which was 2 or 3 stops before where Leanne would have ordinarily got off. But Leanne, being the kind of girl she was, she wanted to make sure Sarah got home safely. And by waving Sarah where she did, near to Sarah's home, that meant that as she entered the darkness of Huffley Gill.
By this time it was 5 p.m. Huffley Gill was a secluded, tree-covered ravine with a path at the bottom. It was no place for a young girl on her own, even one in a hurry to get home.
It would have taken Leanne probably about 20 minutes to walk from that point to get home. It was just over half a mile, between half a mile and 3/4 of a mile.
At 5:30, Sarah rang Leanne's home, but Leanne wasn't there. Mum Sharon was concerned, but when she found out what route her daughter had taken, concern soon turned to alarm.
She realised that she'd walked through Huffley Gill, which is pitch black at that time of day, even though it was only 5 o'clock. Leanne's mum started ringing Leanne's phone frantically. It rang for about 20 times and just rang off. She rang it again. It rang for 4 times and then was seemingly cut off. Panic started to set in from that point on. And after a quick search round the Gill by family and Sarah and friends, the alarm was raised and Leanne was reported missing.
It was now 7 p.m, and Leanne had only been missing a few hours, but police knew time was of the essence. The case was assigned to Chris Gregg, who was a detective superintendent at that time.
From the outset, when Leanne was reported missing, I hope that there's just going to be an innocent explanation, that she'll return, she's gone off to her friends, or there's a secret boyfriend that Mum and Dad don't know about.
Police started searching immediately, and it soon became clear just how massive the task facing them was.
That area is quite a dense urban area, a lot of areas to search. There's an area with lots of housing, commercial premises, there's a river, there's a canal, there are drainage shafts, there are a whole range of search areas that had to be considered.
The next morning, with Leanne now missing for 12 hours, Operation Conifer was launched. The hunt for Leanne was on.
And it was important that we literally, to use the cliche, left no stone unturned. And the search teams went through here, searching the whole area for anything as small as the small items of jewellery that we knew Leanne had bought that day for a friend, looking for a mobile phone, an umbrella, any telltale sign which could help us explain what had happened to Leanne.
It wasn't long before everyone in the community heard the news.
It did make people more cautious. There was lots of different rumours going round, but nobody really knew anything.
It was clear that an early forensic response would be needed, so DSI Gregg called in the Forensic Science Service, or FSS.
Well,
we became involved in the Leanne Tiernan case almost from the outset, once she had gone missing. For reference purposes, if she was found or if an offender came to light, we needed to know her DNA profile and we needed to get her fingerprints. So we actually took her toothbrush and put a DNA profile from that and matched that in with profiles from her parents. And we were also able to obtain her fingerprints from her diary.
After 5 days, the search was still coming up empty-handed, despite the police's best efforts.
The scale of the search to find Leanne was huge. It was one of the biggest search operations the force had ever undertaken. It involved 200 officers, specialist search advisors. It involved the dog section, the mounted section, the underwater search teams.
Peter Grant and his forensic team did what they could under trying circumstances.
The difficulty we faced was that there was no clear scene for us to focus on. There was the last sighting on the bus, and she was also intending to walk all the way home, and the scene could have been anywhere between those 2 points, which was quite a large area. Because a lot of areas were being searched, a lot of items started coming in, but they weren't ones that ended up being relevant to the case.
Getting nowhere, on the 3rd of December, 1 week after Leanne Tiernan had last been seen, the police turned to the media for help.
We staged the reconstruction, and they followed the same route, right to the point where Leanne had been last seen. Now, what struck me when we were doing the reconstruction, which was how black Huffley Gill was, I was just staggered at the vulnerable position she was putting herself in when she entered that gill.
Once aired, the response was immediate.
Following the reconstruction, we were starting to piece together some interesting sightings that people were telling us about and sounds that people had heard, and 2 were of interest to us. One was a lady who said that in the weeks leading up to Leanne's disappearance, she'd seen a man, a rough-looking guy, with a dog, hanging around the entrance to Huffley Gill. And she was a little bit uneasy about this guy because he was trying to engage the children into conversation, the school children.
Straight away, the police got the witness to describe the man she'd seen, to produce an image.
Another lady remembered hearing a scream around the time that we know Leanne would have just about entered the gill. And that again, it might have been connected, it might not, but these 2 pieces of information were important to us.
On December the 4th, police published the EFIT.
We were looking at people in that area who walked through the gill with dogs, and we questioned and found lots of them. We eliminated them all.
With the search still in full swing, officers found out everything they could about the schoolgirl they were looking for.
Leanne was a typical 16-year-old girl who was a lot to live for. She had this radiant smile. She would do anything for anybody. She looked after her grandma, went to church with her, even though she wasn't particularly keen on going to church every Sunday morning, but she did it for her grandma's sake. She'd been in the Brownies, went into the Girl Guides, and she had a group of friends, a very popular girl.
Sister Janet Durbin was the minister at the Methodist chapel where the family worshipped.
Leanne did stand out because she was always bright and shiny, always helpful, and she used to like to carry the flag for the Brownies and the Guides. And as she grew older, we started a Saturday night fellowship for the teenagers, and she used to be one that asked a lot of questions. We talked about all kinds of things that were going on in the world, and she was always up with a hand up and helping. And then Leanne used to like helping in the kitchen, preparing the pizzas and chips and things. It's just a normal young girl.
After 3 weeks, there were still no useful clues, yet police kept on going.
All the time, you were racking your brains. Where is she? What can have happened to her? We've searched 1,100 houses. We've searched drainage pipes, wells, railway lines, canal. We even lowered the canal, almost pulled the plug out and drained it down, because it was easier and quicker to search it that way over 3 miles. And we still hadn't found her.
Over the next few months, police continued searching and questioning people of interest, but it was as if Leanne had disappeared into thin air.
The feeling and the belief that they will still be found safe and well never goes away. And I'm sure that is the case for anybody who's facing that particular situation of a young loved one particularly who's disappeared, that they'll be found ultimately. And personally and professionally, you know that the chances of being found safe and well are slim.
By July, Operation Conifer was in its 8th month, and although the physical searching had all but ended, the police hadn't stopped looking.
The network across the UK was fairly extensive that Leanne was missing, and we were getting calls periodically that a body had been found, and we were checking out. We got Leanne's DNA, so we could quickly eliminate anyone who had been found during that intervening period while she was missing.
On August 20th, 2001, almost 9 months after Leanne's disappearance, DSI Greg received some news that changed the investigation completely. Almost 9 months had gone by without a single clue as to where missing 16-year-old schoolgirl Leanne Tiernan from Bramley in Yorkshire had gone. The longer Leanne remained missing, the more the police suspected the worst. Then police got a call that was to change everything.
The dog walker was in the woods and saw what he thought was a bundle of rubbish that somebody had dumped. And he went over to the bundle and realised that it wasn't rubbish, there was something which he thought was a dead animal in the bags. And he gingerly opened the duvet cupboard and saw that there was some plastic sacks tied with twine at the top. And he broke into one of the bags and realised this wasn't a dead animal, it was a dead person.
Over the months, police had found dozens of bodies around the country that hadn't been Leanne.
But this one immediately felt different. It wasn't far from where Leanne had been last seen, only 16 miles. The body had been left in a shallow grave, and this should just have all the hallmarks of somebody trying to dispose of a body quickly.
Immediately, the scene was meticulously searched.
So when our forensic team started uncovering this, it was found that the girl's body had been encased in 10 plastic bags and had been encased top and tail. So the first bag had been used to put the girl's body in, tied at the top with twine, and then a bag put the opposite direction, tied with twine. And the final bag had been secured around the girl's neck with an 18-inch leather dog collar with a buckle. That parcel had then been put into the duvet cover, and the duvet cover had been used to carry that parcel into the woods. Capturing evidence from this point onwards was going to be crucial for what seemed as though a major crime had been committed.
The decision was made to then retrieve that package intact and take it back to the pathology where it could be thoroughly examined and forensic samples taken, hopefully.
Having examined the crime scene, a profile of the perpetrator began to emerge.
I think the state of the body, particularly the use of ties and the later wrapping and marks of injury, did suggest that the perpetrator approached this in a coldly efficient, ruthless kind of way.
The packaged body of the unknown girl was taken to the nearest mortuary at Harrogate. DSI Greg followed soon after.
Living and breathing a case like this for months, I knew this girl. I knew everything about this girl. And the worst possible outcome was that she was now on this table in front of me. And I knew it was her from the moment I looked at her. And I've never had a feeling like it, before or since. And there was just something at that moment in time that was so powerful, an emotion, that it was a real inner feeling. We've got to solve this for this young kid here.
Once the bags were opened, evidence was found that would prove key in identifying the killer.
When we found her, she had got her hands tied behind her back with 3 cable ties. And there were 2 black cable ties and a yellow one. The black one was around one wrist, the yellow one around her other wrist, and they were connected between the two with another black cable tie, like a daisy chain, in effect. and hands tied behind her back. She'd been strangled with 2 ligatures. One was a dark woolen scarf with a red stripe running through it, and the other was a clear-coloured cable tie that was around her neck and pulled very tightly.
The pathologist was joined by one of Peter Grant's team.
It was very important that we had a forensic scientist at the scene, and she'd actually identified a tuft of fibre on the back of the jumper.
Although DSI Gregg felt certain the body was that of Leanne, a formal identification had to occur.
We already had her fingerprints that we'd taken from her diary, and we were actually able to compare those with the fingerprints on the diary and get a formal identification that this was Leanne Tiernan.
After months of hoping and praying for Leanne's safe return, it was time to tell the family.
The news that they'd been dreading and fearing for 9 months was now suddenly upon them. And I've nothing but admiration for the stoicism, the absolute dignity that Mum and Dad showed at that moment in time.
DSI Gregg was more determined than ever to hunt down Leanne's killer. Back at the mortuary, Peter Grant's team called in an expert in insects, known as an entomologist.
Within the forensic world, we use entomologists to assist with time of death. When someone dies and they're left outside, there is a clearly defined pattern of insects being attracted to the body, and they'll lay their eggs on the body. And the state at which those insects are present can give an indication of how long the body has been dead.
The entomologist quickly made a pivotal discovery.
He was identifying insects that wouldn't normally turn up until a few weeks after a body has started decomposing. They tend to turn up. Certain insects come first, then others, then others. He was getting some of the later insects. Yeah, but maybe this body had been frozen, in that when you have a frozen piece of food and you defrost it, it tends to go off quicker. And there's a similar process happening here.
Investigators believe Leanne could only have been buried where she was found for 1 week, meaning she'd been kept somewhere else the rest of the time. The big question was, where?
This was as sinister as it gets. A young girl clearly been kidnapped. Where we still believed was in that Hopefully Gill area. But had been kidnapped, taken somewhere. Was it in the area she was now disposed of, or was it nearer to Bramley? These were all investigative considerations, which we were still to find the answer to. For us as the investigation team, there were some really forensic opportunities here, and we weren't going to let those opportunities go.
Leanne had been missing for more than 6 months, but the police never gave up trying to find her.
And then when her body was discovered after 9 months, the missing persons case turned into the hunt for her depraved killer, who police and the Forensic Science Service team were determined to bring to justice.
With the suggestion that Leanne had been frozen or stored somewhere, it became important to, we wanted to know where that was, and I established on previous cases that one way of doing this was to look at nasal washings from bodies, because this gives you an idea of where people took their last breath, in effect.
Immediately, pollen expert Dr. Patricia Wiltshire was contacted.
I was called in to get pollen from her to see if I could envisage the sort of place that she had been. Now, we know she'd been buried in this woodland, but had she been anywhere else? Had she been kept anywhere else before she'd been put in the woodland?
Palynology, or the study of plant pollen and spores, was a tool police used quite often.
You've got pollen and spores in the environment, in a sort of mixture. And if someone goes along and picks them up, they will have certain mixtures of pollen, different amounts of different types of pollen, different types of spores on them. And then I know where these plants live and function, so I can envisage a sort of place they've come from. And if I do that, it helps the police find places.
Dr. Wiltshire went to the mortuary in Harrogate.
I irrigated her nasal passages because sometimes people breathe in pollen very deeply up into the nasal passages, right up into the top of the nose. So I irrigated those out And I also washed her hair very carefully. And from those washings, I was able to get assemblages of pollen grains and spores that her hair had picked up. Later, I worked on the duvet cover, and what I found on the duvet cover matched up with what I found in the ant's hair. And I had pollen, plant spores, I got fungal spores. I also got the conducting elements in wood of conifers and of flowering trees, woody plants. And they were charred. There was a lot of microscopic charred material. And I assumed, therefore, that she'd been in contact with something that had been burnt. It seemed like a bonfire because there was hardwood and softwood.
Armed with this information, Dr. Wiltshire began envisioning the sort of place Leanne had been to pick up these materials.
I said to the police that I thought it was a very neglected and downtrodden garden, that it had a bonfire in it. And I was also able to say that there was a privet hedge, there was probably either a plum or a damson tree close by, and also the ground area was very, very neglected with brambles and all sorts of plants that are weeds, really.
With Dr. Wiltshire's incredible insight, police just needed to find a suspect with a garden that matched. Unfortunately, not all the forensics was going their way.
Leanne's body, with the decomposition, completely obliterated the potential for DNA and fingerprints on the items that she was encased in. But there were other opportunities that we considered really, really significant.
One of these was the duvet.
Unfortunately, although we did find some body fluids on this duvet, we weren't able to get any sort of DNA result, which was a major disappointment, I think, down partly to the condition of the body. Then we had to fall back on some other types of evidence from the duvet, and we noticed on there that there are a lot of animal hairs that look like dog hairs, all of a relatively similar colour and appearance, suggesting it all come from one dog.
The lack of DNA was a major concern.
We realised we had to fall back on some more traditional forensic methods and maybe build up a forensic picture that we could then use as an intelligence tool to identify an offender.
Detective Superintendent Craig and his team went back to basics, hoping that something would point them in the direction of Leanne's killer.
The physical items which she was bound with, the cable ties, who had manufactured them? Where were they being distributed or sold these? Who had possession of them? And for what purpose? There was a yellow one, two black ones, and the one that had been used as a ligature, the neutral coloured ones. What's the provenance of these? We don't know until we start drilling down and finding out.
While the police got on discovering where the cable ties and dog collar came from, Peter Grant and his team continued putting together their forensic picture.
We built up a jigsaw, if you like, of different pieces of forensic evidence. We had the twine, we had fibres, we had dog hair.
The items themselves mean nothing. It's only when you start finding out the backstory to the items that suddenly they become relevant. The fibre that was found on Leanne's back, we found out that that was a carpet fibre. And we got experts in Bradford, which is in the textile heart of the north, to help us with this. And they gave us the type of carpet that had very likely come from.
All of this forensic evidence needed a suspect to be of use. Then the dog hair on the duvet grabbed the team's attention.
From the dog hair point of view, although we could tell it was dog hair, we did notice that some of these hairs had quite decent roots, that if it was a human hair, we'd think, well, we could DNA test that.
The problem was no one had ever DNA tested dog hair in the UK. Then Peter Grant made an interesting discovery.
I found out that at that time there was a university in America that had actually established a method to carry out DNA testing on dog hair, so that was our next port of call, with a view to potentially doing some sort of dog mass DNA.
If it came off, it could be the break police needed. And that wasn't all. Information about the cable ties used to bound and strangle Leanne had been unearthed.
We found out where they were all manufactured, and 3 of them seemingly took us nowhere. But one of them, we thought this could be interesting. It was the yellow cable tie, manufactured by a UK company, and millions made. And so you think, seemingly, this is going to take us nowhere. But what interesting about this, as opposed to the others, was that 90% of these were used by the Royal Mail. Could this be somebody who's got connections with the Royal Mail? Maybe, maybe not.
The twine used to tie up the plastic bags also had a story to tell.
It was a unique twine that had been put together from a forensic perspective, was absolutely terrific. You know, because you knew that if you could find more of that twine, you could match it up.
The team's momentum continued.
The leather dog collar around her neck. We looked at this dog collar, manufactured in Nottingham. And it was a dog collar that many millions were sold worldwide. So we knew it was a long shot. We worked out there were X number of pet shops in Leeds that sold these dog collars. We went to every pet shop. We asked them the question. We got nowhere.
While DSI Greg's team chased long shots, Peter Grant had gone to America with the dog hair to extract DNA.
After a couple of days working with them, we were actually able to identify they had a reasonable method and that this was worth a go, and we carried out the test on 2 of our dog hairs, and we did obtain a decent dog DNA profile.
Now police could organise the UK's first mass dog screening in the hope of identifying Leanne's killer. Unaware of this result, police in West Yorkshire were looking at the 120 dog collar wholesalers in the UK.
113 were checked, and the detective got the answer back each time saying, no, no, no. Pet shop, pet shop, pet shop. We supplied her. Company 114, based in Liverpool, gave an answer that the detective wasn't expecting, which was, yes, we do sell those dog collars. And yes, we do have a customer, a private customer in Leeds, who bought one. In fact, bought 6 and paid for it on a credit card.
This was the moment DSI Greg and his team had been praying for.
And have you got the name of that customer? Yes. It's Mr. J. Taylor at Armley, Leeds. Thank you very much.
With that, 10 months after her disappearance, the investigation into the sickening murder of Leanne Tiernan finally had a suspect. The investigation into what was now the brutal murder of 16-year-old schoolgirl Leanne Tiernan from Bramley in Yorkshire finally had the breakthrough police had been looking for. The dog collar found around Leanne's neck had led police to a John Taylor from Leeds.
We found out he worked for a company called Parcelforce, which is part of the Royal Mail. He was living at home on his own in the adjoining township of Armley, which is adjacent to Bramley. He'd been divorced for 4 years, had some children, but they didn't live with him. He'd never been in trouble with the police. People knew him as John the Pet Man. He seemingly kept himself to himself, but we quickly found out that he had a bit of a nocturnal life as a poacher. He liked to go out poaching.
The connection between the dog collar and ready access to Royal Mail cable ties was too much to ignore. 16th of October 2001, almost 10 months after Leanne's disappearance, police made their move and arrested John Taylor.
Of course, he denied any connection with Leanne, not having done anything wrong, and was denying that he'd had certain pets or animals because we were interested in pets that he'd had with our animal DNA that we were also trying to link.
News of the arrest soon travelled around the area.
It was a real shock. Because, you know, he was a neighbour. You know, you said hello to him. He used to sell pet food, and my kids used to go over to his house to buy pet food for the rabbits. And it was just a real shock.
John Taylor was taken for questioning, and the Forensic Science Services team methodically searched his house.
The immediate thing that struck us was that there were no carpets in the house. Just bare floorboards everywhere. But it did appear that, certainly in some rooms, that he'd only recently taken up the carpets. And we actually identified that some of the tufts of carpet still clinging onto nails in the corners of rooms were actually the same red fibres we'd found adhering to Leanne's jumper.
The evidence police needed kept on coming.
The black cable tie that had been used to bind Leanne's hands, we found some broken ones on the fence in the garden outside. exactly the same manufacture and code. We found 2 more dog collars in the house that was still there that matched the same dog collar that had led us to John Taylor's door in the first place.
Also during the search, there was some rabbit netting found. John Taylor's quite into trapping animals. And the makeup of the twine used to make this rabbit netting was exactly the same as the twine that had been used to tie the green bags.
So all the critical items that to him were so insignificant, suddenly were now coming back to haunt him.
With all this damning evidence mounting up, the forensic team called in Dr. Wiltshire.
I travelled up to Yorkshire, went into the garden, and it was amazing. The garden was so much like I'd envisaged. I just couldn't believe it. But there were 2 bonfires. There were the remains of 2 bonfires. The elements that I found in Leanne's hair and on the duvet were on the left-hand side of the garden. Also, to approach that area, you had to go under a sort of archway, and there was a big, it was either a plum or a damson. There were no flowers on it, no fruits, but I knew it was a plum or a damson. And of course I'd found that pollen. I'd found the plum and damson pollen. I'd found all these plants that were in the hedge and around, and all these weeds on the ground. I'd found the remnants of a bonfire, and I could say it's on the left-hand side of the garden, not the right-hand side. And it just all came to life for me at that minute.
Dr. Wiltshire's accuracy was astonishing. At the police station, Taylor continued to be interviewed.
Faced with this overwhelming evidence, which we now had against him, he said he admitted he killed her, but tried to claim it was an accident.
John Taylor then gave his version of events.
He had gone to Huffley Gill that Sunday afternoon with his dog to take the dog for a walk, when he saw a young girl walking down the path. He grabbed the girl, told her not to scream. He had a scarf, which he tied around her eyes as a blindfold, took his coat off and put it on the girl and pulled the hood up.
Incredibly, at approximately 5 p.m. on Sunday the 26th of November, John Taylor then walked a terrified Leanne Tiernan the 22 minutes back to his house through an estate and even over a busy road.
She was now in the clutches of this predator.
Once at his house, he took her upstairs and tied her hands with cable ties.
She kicked out at him, and he grabbed her. He says she fell on the floor and banged her head, and there was blood all over the place. And that's how she died.
It was a story that contradicted the evidence.
Now, we had a problem explaining how Leanne hadn't died from a head injury. She died from strangulation. The cable tie that was used to kill her had been pulled to such an extent, so tight it was only 10 centimetres in diameter. He hadn't killed her by accident. He'd strangled her.
John Taylor was doing his best to avoid a murder charge, but DSI Greg wasn't about to let that happen.
We put an identity parade together, and the lady who'd seen the man with the dog hanging around, talking to children, who she was uneasy about, picked him out.
The identification was a persuasive argument for the police's case that this had been a well-planned crime. But there was one crucial bit of evidence missing.
One of the more grim aspects of the scene was that a dog was buried in the garden. And this was a dog that had essentially been hit over the head with a shovel, it appeared. And unfortunately, the dog was in such, again, advanced state of decay that it wasn't suitable for us to DNA test, so we just decided not to pursue that line in the end.
It was a blow that, despite all the effort, the dog DNA was unusable. Officers carried on questioning Taylor.
He denied freezing Leanne's body, but we know it was frozen through the medical evidence. What his story was that after he'd killed her, he didn't know what to do with her body. So to start with, he took it into the back garden and put Leanne's body under a lot of pallets and tried to hide it that way until he could think what to do with her.
Police certain that Leanne had been frozen. They just didn't know why.
Maybe he considered it wiser to actually keep the body inside his house than to put it in the landscape that was currently undergoing a very thorough search.
Another theory was that John Taylor kept Leanne frozen as a morbid trophy he could continually revisit for his grotesque pleasure. Next, he claimed he took her to Lindley Wood just days after killing her.
We know that Leanne's body had been in the woods for a maximum of a week, and there was a witness who saw a man a week before the body was found lifting a bundle out of the boot of a car that matched John Taylor's description, that matched the description of his car, taking it into the woods.
John Taylor was charged, and then on the 8th of July 2002, over 18 months after 16-year-old Leanne Tiernan went missing, he stood trial at Leeds Crown Court for her kidnap and murder. Faced with the overwhelming evidence against him, he changed his plea.
Taylor had been trying to minimise his part in Leanne's death, claiming it was an accident, an unfortunate accident. But right at the end, he knew he had to face the prosecution case.
There was a great relief to the family not having to go through a whole trial, and he was convicted.
He was described as a sadistic sexual predator by the judge, told he'd never be released from prison. That changed, of course, with the new Sentencing Act, sentenced to 30 years. That's the calibre of this individual. He's a killer, shows no remorse. Not once would he have had any compassion for this young girl in his clutches, only what he wanted to do with her.
The local community welcomed the news.
I think there was a sense of relief after it had all come to a head, that somebody had been prosecuted for this crime. But I don't think an area can ever go back to the same again, because you're always wary of other things that might happen.
I would find it hard to forgive him, although we have to forgive him. Obviously an evil man. He'd planned to get somebody, and Leanne just happened to be there. And a cruel man. All the dead animals that he'd just battered to death. I can't understand him.
After 12 months of frustration and dead ends, Leanne's killer had finally been brought to justice.
The case that was built by the whole team was one that there was no wriggle room for John Taylor whatsoever. And I think that's just testament to the professional and thorough job that everyone on this case did.
You don't often witness where killers of this propensity and cruelty are here in front of you, being sentenced, and the words poured on them from the bench. But whilst it did bring to an end one part of the investigation into John Taylor, it wasn't the final chapter. Because in our minds there was more to tell. This couldn't be the first time that he'd done this.
As a result of Leanne's murder inquiry, police reopened at least 10 cold case investigations looking at Taylor, convinced this wasn't a one-off. And less than a year after his conviction, Taylor pleaded guilty to 2 separate rapes.